Welcome to Erie. Heisman Trophy winner, Rookie of the Year, NFL All-Star. What else did Donald Trump say about your football career?
I know. I told Steve the funniest thing about all this. So I did play football in high school, and I was a fairly good football player, and I was not great, but fairly good. And the former president would never believe that I wasn't a great football player. And he would say to me all the time, you know, people tell me you're a great football player. So, you know, Mr. President, I played like one JV game and I got injured. And that was the zenith of my West Point careers. In the 1982 media guide, I'm listed as a top freshman prospect. And then it was kind of all downhill from there. And so we'd be on Air Force One and the president would walk in and say, do you know David was a great football player? And I said, Mr. President, I really wasn't. And so I showed Steve a little video on the way over here. We did an event at the Shell cracker factory in Beaver County with this big methane plant that they crack methane gas and make plastics. And in front of about 8,000 people, this is like live on C-SPAN. And the president recognizes I want to thank my good friend David Urban for Beaver County. Where's David? He's like, David was a great football player at Army. He was a great athlete at Army. And so now I have that as proof that I really was a great football player. If Donald Trump says it's so, it must be so. Because we know he never exaggerates about anything. So
we always say, welcome to Erie, and people say, oh, I remember driving by on I-90, or I think I have some relatives who lived here. But for you, I can say, welcome back.
Yeah, I was sharing with Steve. So, I grew up, as you may have heard, originally from Beaver County in Aliquippa. My father was a steel worker, and we didn't go to the Jersey Shore. We came to Presque Isle, right? My entire family. It's great. So my entire family would decamp from Ambridge and Aliquippa and Hopewell, my extended family, and they'd come, and this is the part I don't remember. We'd rent cottages someplace, right? We'd all rent cottages and be in different cottages, and the adults in the family would sit out at picnic tables and play cards and smoke cigarettes and drink beer, shockingly. And the kids would go to sleep, and then we'd go to the beach and we'd go to Waldemere Park, right? I mean, it's like who could have a better childhood? And every year I'd bring back more driftwood than my parents would care from Erie, and schlep it back down 79 to my home. And so, Erie, Pennsylvania has been a big part of my life. My father, who passed away a few years ago, had a form of dementia, and he couldn't really remember things that happened in the past 5 minutes, but he could remember, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And we came up here towards the end of his life, and I made him recount one of the first dates he took my mom on to Presque Isle. We went to the beach and kind of walked around. It was a really sweet moment for us. And it's a great town. It's a great city. You've got great history. The War of 1812, wouldn't have occurred, without Erie, Pennsylvania. And the most spectacular piece of art in the United States hangs outside or is painted on the wall outside the United States Senate chamber, which is the Battle of Lake Erie with Oliver Hazard Perry on the wall. So it's a spectacular thing. And I frequently remind people that one of the fanciest, nicest resorts in the eastern part of the United States, the Inn at Perry Cabin, right? People don't really understand why the Inn at Perry Cabin exists on the eastern shore of Maryland, but it was Oliver Hazard Perry's cabin boy who built a replica of he was such a hero after the War of 1812 that they built a replica of his cabin, and they had people come to visit his cabin and stay overnight on the eastern shore of Maryland, and it's a lovely resort now, and it's all because of Erie, Pennsylvania. So I know a little bit about the place.
You do indeed.
And by the way, I did bring Donald Trump here in 2016. No one had ever, people were saying, why are we going to Erie? And I told Paul Manafort, I said, because it's a really important place in the state of Pennsylvania.
Well, welcome back. I'm going to ask you to move your mic a little closer so
sure.
we can hear every word.
Sure.
Just a point of personal privilege, because you have swam in Lake Erie.
Been many times.
My cousin Bob North, please stand. He actually swam across Lake Erie.
Wow, that's pretty big. That's big.
And he did it in record time. No, stand up for a minute. It's okay.
That's big.
You did it in record time. 17 hours? 12 hours. I was up. Would you do it again?
Well, that's impressive.
Anyhow, welcome. Well, listen, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah, great to be here.
Let's talk about Mike Pence first, because Donald Trump selected Mike Pence in 2016 because he was the establishment. Conservative, member of the House, governor, evangelical, Christian conservative, shoring up the base in the Republican Party that helped him win in 2016. Yesterday, he drops out of the race, 1% in the polls in New Hampshire. It's not the party that he saw in 2016. What does that say about the Republican Party?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, right? Mike Pence is an incredibly good man. Mike Pence is an incredibly good man. I've got a chance to spend a lot of time with Mike Pence, and he's a really great individual and great American. And it's kind of sad to see, in my opinion, to see Mike Pence besmirched so much for doing what he believed to do his constitutional duty on January 6th and not kind of straying from that. Mike Pence, I think, should be praised for having so much courage and internal fortitude for doing what he did, and he kind of fell off the face of the earth, right? Many of you don't obviously know me that well or follow me that closely, but so I was very close to the president. I was asked to be the president's chief of staff on three occasions, maybe more, three that I recall, and I didn't take the job for a variety of reasons. One, that I would either quit or got fired because the president and I frequently didn't agree on lots of things, and so. Do I think Donald Trump won the 2020 election? No, I think the president lost the election in 2020. And when we were on the run up to 2020, he'd ask me frequently, "Do you think I could lose? How could I lose to Joe Biden?" And I'd explain to him how we won in 2016 by 45,000 votes, and it's not a lot in the Commonwealth. And I said, and I predicted, I said, "Mr. President, we will win or lose this next election by 50 to 75,000 votes. That's my estimate." I was off by a little bit. It was 88,000. So, Republicans need to get their head around the fact that we lost the election in 2020, and people want to talk about the future. They don't want to relitigate something in the past. Do I think that the Democrats, that the laws were changed in certain states that benefited Democrats in a certain way during the pandemic? Absolutely. In the state of Pennsylvania, that happened. Republicans just weren't prepared to take advantage of it and to bank votes, to mail-in votes, to vote early. Republicans just weren't prepared to do that. And so the Democrats played the game better. And I think that the party now has gone to that extreme part of the party. A lot of it has gone to the extreme part of the party where Mike Pence is not an honorable man. They view him as not honorable. And the litmus test is, do you believe that the election was stolen in 2020, not lost? And that's not good. It's not good for America. It's not good for Republicans, and it's not good for democracy. I think we have to recognize that we lost. Republicans lost, and how do we win again in 2024? Right? I mean, there's no shame in losing. I mean, everyone in this room has been at one point in their life down. It's the Teddy Roosevelt Man of the Arena speech. You dust yourself off. You get up. You fight another day, and that's what people admire about individuals. They don't want to hear somebody whining about what they did in the past. And I advised the former president lots of times that when you talk about voting, like the president in 2016 would always say, "Oh, what about all these voter fraud in Philadelphia?" And I'd go route and verse and explain it all to him. And I'd say, "It sounds like you're kind of a whiner and a loser if that's what you're talking about all the time. Let's talk about perspective things. Let's talk about the good things we've done." And I think in this upcoming election, if Donald Trump focuses on what happened in 2020 versus what can happen in 2024, 25, I think he's not going to be successful. I think he needs to kind of turn the page.
But he can't help himself.
I understand, Steve, and you need strong people around him. And I will tell you, it is like my wife would say to me, "Is it really good that you swear at the president that much?" Sorry, Father. But you can't get through to him sometimes, right? And it was really, I think there's a lot of you give and take. You need people around who are going to really push back. I don't think that the people, a lot of people around him served him well, right? I don't think, for example, Mark Meadows did a good job being a gatekeeper that he was supposed to be, right? I think the president wouldn't be in a lot of trouble that he is in now if he had a strong chief of staff that said, "We're not going to do these things." What is not in there is my class. So I'm a West Point class of 1986 graduate, and this is kind of not overstating it a little bit, but I introduced Mike Pompeo to the president, who then I helped him get to be the CIA director. Then he became Secretary of State. And Mark Esper, who was the Secretary of Defense, is my classmate who I've known since 11th grade. The Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Army, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs were all folks that I had a large role putting in these and helping get these jobs. And most of them kind of, when it came time, kind of pushed back to the president and said, these things aren't great. We shouldn't do this. This is not your best interest. People need to be in this election, I think, Steve, kind of pushing back on that narrative. Otherwise, I think we will lose it because these elections are going to be so close, right, in the state of Pennsylvania and other places. Trump's challenge is, Donald Trump faces a great challenge of winning kind of the suburbs, winning Erie County, right? He'll perform strongly in the county, but will he get enough votes to win? And I think it matters about what he says about the election in the future. If you want to look in the rearview mirror, or do you want to look through the windshield, right? Most people, I think people in this room want to hear how my life's going to be better, right? What are you going to do about interest rates? What are you going to do about bringing back jobs? About AI? What are we going to do with AI, right? All these things are really affecting our communities. What are we going to do about the border? About fentanyl? Things that people care about in America. Nobody wants to hear whining about an election that a lot of people question whether it was stolen or not. So
I want to come back to that, and I ask this with all due respect. How can we understand Donald Trump?
Yeah.
The guy who came down the escalator in 2015 that people thought was a joke. The guy nobody thought would win. 4 major charges, 91 counts, twice impeached, January 6th. And as George W. Bush said to the Erie crowd, this is not my Republican Party 2 years ago. How can we understand Donald Trump? Please explain. He is a phenomenon.
Yeah, well, if I could I'd have a best-selling book if I could do that, right? I'd be in great. I don't know if you can explain Donald Trump, right? It's what you see is what you get with Donald Trump to a large extent, right? There is no. It's when you get on the plane, when you ride on Air Force One with a guy, or I've had the good fortune of riding in the back of the Beast, right, in that cool limousine, right? I've sat next to the president for many trips, probably 4 or 5 trips with myself and the president. It's the same guy you see on TV, the same guy who tweets is the same guy who's in the back of that limousine. There is no filter. He's not polling. He is, for better or for worse, what you see is what you get. And unfortunately, sometimes you would like to see a little bit of more reflection, right? And a little bit more of a filter and a little bit more thought, perhaps, rather than just kind of flow of consciousness. I think he is one-on-one individually, whether you like the president's policies or not, if you spend any time with him.
Very engaging.
He's incredibly charming. I was on a panel out in California this summer, and I was on a panel with, it was Jerry Brown, myself, Jeb Bush, Karl Rove, a bunch of other like hoity-toity people. And Jerry Brown, right, Governor Moonbeam, right, who's probably the most liberal progressive governor that you could ever imagine, said to this group of executives, I was out at this Bohemian Grove function, which is kind of like a whole nother thing. But we're sitting there, and so I was talking about Trump a little bit, and Jerry Brown said, I don't agree with anything that Donald Trump has ever said, but I'll tell you, when he came out here to deal with the fires, the forest wildfires, I spent about 2 hours with him, flying around one-on-one. He's a heck of a nice guy. He's really engaging. He asked a lot of good questions. He's very interesting. And Brown said, I can see how people could vote for him. I think the Democratic Party's in big trouble. I mean, this was Jerry Brown, right? So I think that, he speaks to, and this is not a phenomenon. What Trump does is he speaks to, kind of what could be in America, what used to be and what could be, right? I think people in America see we've kind of lost our way a little bit, right, on a lot of different issues. And, I don't want to get too controversial here, but, a lot of people think, look, there are 2 genders, right? It's not that outrageous, right? We should be saying the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. There are things that aren't like that crazy, right? The belittling of religious faith in America, right, is so bad now that it is incredible. And, Trump gets that to a certain extent, right? I mean, he gets it, and he's not afraid to say it, where other politicians, they don't want to offend somebody by saying like, oh, I go to mass every day. I'm a daily communicant. Oh, we better message test that first, right, to see how that plays. That's not what you get with Donald Trump. So and a lot of his policies, a lot of things that were implemented, right? I saw Chamarath, I can't remember the guy's name now, who's this billionaire kind of Silicon Valley liberal who has, a big podcast and says, look, I voted against Trump 2 times, but, I think maybe my Trump derangement syndrome got the best of me. And now in retrospect, I think his policy on deregulation, on deficits, on the border, on all these things, I think Trump may have gotten it right. I just couldn't see past my dislike of the individual to see that some of his policies are really good. So there's this disconnect with Trump and with many people that they can't stand the guy's nonstop rattling, right? He's kind of babbling, but they like what happens, right? I think the best thing that happened to Donald Trump is he was kicked off Twitter, right? Because people kind of forgot, right? They kind of got a little, people were so tired. I worked with the guy. I talked to the guy a couple times a week. It's exhausting, right? It's exhausting for America. It's exhausting for all you. People don't want to, they just want their trash picked up. They want the country that's safe, right? And they don't want to hear this constant, on this battling on and on. And I think they got a break and they get another alternative. This is what's going on now. This is how the Democrats choose to run the country. And I think people are saying, well, maybe that's not so good either. Maybe, Joe Biden says famously, don't judge me against the almighty, judge me against the alternative. And he used that to get elected. He was pointing at Trump and he said, this guy's nuts. Don't judge me against, somebody who's, really a great performer. Judge me against Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump will say now, don't judge me against the almighty, judge me against the alternative. If you want 4 more years of a Biden-Harris, most likely 4 more years of a Harris administration, then go, by all means, vote for Democrats. If you think that your tax dollars are being well put to use, if you think you can go, inflation's not going to kill you, you can't get you can't get a mortgage for your house under 8%, can't get a car loan, all these things that are just really affecting your pocketbook, then please, by all means, vote for Joe Biden and the Democrats. That's what you're going to see. And I don't think, polls, Steve said this clearly, nobody really wants to see this race, right? Nobody wants to see Donald Trump run against Joe Biden. There are lots of great alternatives, but yet that's where we are because of our primary system. I was at the Steelers game, and I just met another great governor. I told Governor Shapiro, who's a good friend of mine, I said, I just met my new favorite Jewish Democratic governor.
He didn't help the Steelers, though.
Listen, he's crazy. Governor Josh Green, MD, is from Chartiers Valley in Beaver County, right? Chartiers Valley High School.
And he is the best friend of he's my brother-in-law's best friend.
Of
Hawaii.
He's a governor of Hawaii.
Yeah.
He's the governor of Hawaii, and he's at the Steelers game. And I'm like, he's a star. He's a rising star. He's a guy who, with Josh Shapiro or Wes Moore in Maryland, some really bright Democratic governors. Gretchen Whitmer, and I'm not a giant fan of Gretchen Whitmer, but a lot of people like her. But, there are really outstanding people on the Democratic ticket and on the Republican ticket that will make great presidents at some point. And I think people are eager to get to that, right? They're eager to turn the page and kind of get to what's next. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. We get what we get right now, which is going to be pretty entertaining.
One more Donald Trump question, and then I'll talk about the campaign. And I asked him this question in the Roosevelt Room in 2019, which is, did you ever think about dialing it back just a little? Did you ever think that maybe you were just going a little too far over the top? Just the other day, Trump is saying, I want to punch Joe Biden. Boom, boom, boom. You saw that speech. So did you ever have that conversation with him?
Steve, I've had, I used to send him, so Dan Scavino is one of the guys who is kind of in the Trump orbit, who's the social media person who's with Trump a bunch. And so Trump would send out these, on Thanksgiving Day, I'll just tell you another vignette. Thanksgiving Day, I can't remember if I called the president, he called me. And he says, I said, happy Thanksgiving, Mr. President. And he's like, did you see my tweet about Romney? No, happy Thanksgiving, David, See my tweet about Romney? I said, no, Mr. President, I didn't see it. I said, but let me ask you a question. What do you care about Mitt Romney? You're the president of the United States. He's a senator. Just let it go. Read the tweet, call me back. Click. Literally, right? So there's no dialing it back for Donald Trump. I would send Scavino clips about Pennsylvania. Lowest historic unemployment rate in Pennsylvania. All the great things that were happening across the Commonwealth. I mean, success story after success story. And I'd say to Scavino, why doesn't he just get him to tweet one of these things out this week? it'll be a victory for me, right? Just one. I tell the president, not interested, not interested, not who he is as a person, right? He's a grappler. He likes to give and take. He's a showman. He's a salesman.
Is he the Republican nominee?
Oh, he's the Republican nominee. Like, whether you like it or not, he's the Republican nominee 3 months ago. So here's what's going to be. This will be analyzed in political science classes all across America. I live in the state of Florida now, and I know Governor DeSantis a bit. The interesting part is I know every candidate. It's pretty funny. You get to be kind of a small world. Vivek Ramaswamy was one of my clients at one point in time. Was a lobbying client of mine.
Wow.
And so Ron DeSantis, you remember, in the election that fall, when he won in the state of Florida, he won by a huge margin, and he was the darling of everybody, the Republican Party, of the media, of everybody. And Donald Trump was gone. He was in the hinterlands. He was in Elba. He was by himself on an island, and DeSantis was like the Colossus at Rhodes striding across the harbor. Right? I mean, he was just bigger than life, right? He was just so big. And I had spent a lot of time with the governor one-on-one, and I kind of know his weaknesses and strengths. And he said, I'm not going to get in the race until my General Assembly session is over here in the state of Florida. And you could just watch from that moment till today, his popularity drop and drop and drop and drop and drop and drop and drop. And if he would have gotten in the race and campaigned and sucked the oxygen out of the room and not allowed Trump to get in the race, I think things would be different today. Alvin Bragg, that moment, that seminal, that pivotal moment, was when Alvin Bragg, the district attorney in New York City, right, brought this case against the former president. And I could tell you, I don't know how many of you watch CNN, but I do lots at CNN, and I do a lot of television at CNN. I'm the Juan Williams at CNN. I am the lone, or one of the lone Republicans. It's a lonely place at times. And so I was there in New York with Anderson Cooper and a bunch of other folks, and they had all their all their legal analysts on. And to a person, everyone said, "Well, this is terrible. This Alvin Bragg case is the worst thing that could ever happen for the Democrats and for anybody who doesn't like Trump, because now it really does feed into the narrative they're just out to get him." And
you said,
I don't remember what I said. What did I say?
You said this is not going to hurt him. I remember.
Oh, I did. I said it's not going to hurt Trump at all. It was, Elie Honig, who is he's a legal analyst at CNN and probably one of the most straight down the middle people I've ever met in my life. Incredible legal scholar, great lawyer. If you ever want to watch somebody or follow somebody on Twitter who really tells it like it is, and whether it's favorable to Trump or unfavorable to Trump, Elie Honig came on, and I talked to Elie a bunch, and he said, this case is terrible. This is a terrible case. It would never be brought if the guy's name wasn't Donald Trump. And so that was the moment that Trump became a viable candidate again, in my opinion, because it fed into the narrative, right? So after Trump was elected in 2016, I chose, for a variety of reasons, not to go into the administration, which in retrospect was probably the smartest thing I've ever done in my life. Saved me lots of legal bills. And I never got a subpoena. I never testified before grand jury. Lots of people I know did all these things, and it was terrible. And so, as you remember, during those first couple years of the Trump administration, every day Trump was going to be indicted. There was Russian collusion. The Russians did this. The Russians did that. It was terrible. And now we find out years later, it was all kind of made up. It really didn't exist. None of it was true. It was all created with money from the DNC and some other folks. And so that gets planted as a seed, right? That's a seed. Then you have this impeachment. You have all these things that all kind of build upon this narrative. This Alvin Bragg case builds upon the narrative that Donald Trump kind of got the short change of being president. And so that was the seminal moment, I think, in this race that kind of flipped the switch, allowed Trump to kind of catapult. Now, I will say, sitting there the first time when I sat with Anderson Cooper saying, and it was a very momentous day, and it was the the surrender of Donald Trump to the court, went and turned himself in, got arrested. And then the second time, and then the third time, and the fourth time. I submit to most Americans that's just white noise, right? It's all people hear, just white noise, because it's built in. Because there's a system of justice that, if you look on the network that I'm on, CNN, right? They'll have Andrew McCabe is on, right? Who this is in public. This is not anything that's secret. Andrew McCabe lied to he's a deputy director of the FBI, had lied to the FBI, was recommended that he be prosecuted by the Department of Justice, and he wasn't, right? He didn't get prosecuted. He's now an analyst on CNN, making judgments about Donald Trump's culpability. But yet he lied to the FBI, Department of Justice recommended prosecution, but somehow he got off, right? The same thing with Mr. Clapper, right? Lied to the Congress, right? Lied to the Congress. Nothing happened. The same thing with Mr. Brennan. Lied. Didn't get prosecuted. So the narrative, right, that people are out to get Donald Trump, sometimes it appears to be true, right? And so DeSantis, at that point in time, was kind of ascendant, and that's the point when kind of all fell off. And now I submit everybody's theory of the game is hope. That's their strategy at this point, is that they hope that something happens, because there is no strategy to victory, right? You have to win Iowa. There are 99 counties in Iowa in the caucus, as Steve knows. And you can travel around. Rick Santorum did this famously. Traveled around, knock on doors, sit in people's living rooms, and you cajole and you convince people one by one. It's very retail. It's very retail intensive. You convince people to vote for you. But yet, I don't see people really putting that kind of energy and effort in to kind of unseat Trump, because a lot of the people in Iowa have already made their minds up, right? The caucuses are on the 15th. Trump is ahead by double digits in Iowa. Double digits.
32 points.
Yeah, it's insurmountable, 32 points. You could go to every county and people are going to say, yeah, I'm good. I'm voting for Donald Trump. And so the theory of the case now for Nikki Haley or for Donald Trump, for DeSantis or for Chris Christie, or any of the people who remain in the race.
Well, Chris Christie is in the race.
I think he thinks that he's going to do very well. I think Christie thinks he's going to do second or third in New Hampshire, because it's open primary, and he'll be ascendant, right? And something he's the same hope as everyone else. He has to hope that Donald Trump chokes on a ham sandwich. Basically, that's their, because that's the only
or
thing
a McDonald's burger.
A burger, right? But I mean that's really because, and he's not going to get knocked off anywhere, along the way. I mean, we can take it back and think about these things, right? If you look at all the cases that are currently facing the former president, right? There are a lot of them. Like Steve said, 91 charges. That's a lot of charges, right? There are four big cases. The Alvin Bragg case, right, which everybody kind of admits is a joke, number one. So it's kind of irrelevant. The second case is I think the most serious case against the president and presents the most legal jeopardy, but will be the least consequential, which is the documents case, the obstruction of justice case, right? Now, whether or not the president can have documents or not, classified documents or not, is a question we can argue about for a long time, because you can have some. I've seen the Kim Jong-un letter. The president kept the Kim Jong-un letter.
What's in that?
It says, like, I just read it's in Korean, so I don't speak Korean, but the version that I saw, which the president proudly showed me in the Oval Office, said something to the effect like, "Dear greatest president in the history of the world."
Wow, right? What a great way to.
Shocking that he would find that interesting.
Yes,
right? But it was from
best letter ever.
It was the best letter ever, right? But it was kind of one of those things that I read it and I thought, like, it's pretty funny. It was actually funny, right? It wasn't like, it was really, you could see, like, you're the greatest president and you're a great negotiator, and I enjoy our relationship. But so Trump kept that. Is that like a big deal that Trump kept that letter? No, it's not a big deal. Is it a big deal he may have kept some classified material on Iran's capabilities with Israel and vis-a-vis? That's obviously a bigger issue. Nobody knows what's kept, because it's all so classified, right? It's so classified that the lawyers don't even have the classification levels to be able to read it and review it and prosecute the guy. So, but anyhow, so whether or not he kept the material is part one, and that's an important part, but not so important. The bigger part is that when the National Archives and everybody went to Trump and said, hey, all those documents you have, we need some of them back. And Trump said, I'm not giving them back. I'm not going to give them back. And that whole obstruction of justice part, right, is a little bit tougher because there are emails, you may have seen some of this where there's Walt Nauta with a shush emoji. When your staff is sending emails to you, they're like, shh, don't tell anybody we're doing this. Probably not that great for you, right, legally. That's a sign that you should probably, get another lawyer. And so that's really legally pretty challenging, I think, for the former president, that case. The good part for that former president is that case is being tried in a district in Florida, which is like a 99% Republican district, right? And so the burden of proof, what you need to prove to convict the president is, beyond a reasonable doubt. The level for criminal, a criminal charge is pretty high, right? It's got to be not just you think the guy did it, but it's got to be you could have no doubt. There can be no doubt that he did this and he intended to do it. And all it takes is one juror in that jury poll to say, I'm not really sure he did it. I'm not really sure he intended to do it. And you're not guilty, right? So I think that's where he faces the most legal challenge, but because of the jury and where it's held, I think he'll not be in trouble there. The third case, which is, you see, is this January 6th case, right? Which is really not about January 6th. It's more about the Electoral College, right? And electors. And I will buy anybody here a steak dinner at your favorite restaurant in New York City, wherever you want to go, if you can explain the Electoral College to me. If anybody can come up here and tell me how it works, right? You're way smarter than me. And I was the chief elector in 2016 in Harrisburg. I got to, all the electors, I counted and tallied them, and I said some fancy stuff in the General Assembly and wrote something down, and it went to Washington, D.C., where they counted it, and it was a big deal. But that whole case that Jack Smith brought is really not about January 6th. It's not about those images you saw where people are beating police officers with fire extinguishers or with flagpoles. The really horrific stuff, that's not what that case is about. That was, if you see that, that's viscerally, you feel like that's pretty bad stuff. It'd be really hard to defend anybody's actions on that day. But that's not what the case is about. It's about whether or not the president and his campaign team had the right to prepare and present an alternative slate of electors, and they're saying if in fact that their legal cases were able to bear out, and that they weren't the cases the election were to fail in Georgia, that you have these slate of electors. They happened in Pennsylvania and a few other places. So that case, pretty hard case to prove. Pretty hard case to prove. Unfortunately for the president, that case is being tried in the District of Columbia. You know how many people voted for Donald Trump in the District of Columbia?
7.
About 7. 18,405, I think, right? And you know how many people voted against him? 350,000 voted against Donald Trump. And so if you're Donald Trump, or if you're anybody, right, and you're going to looking for a jury of your peers, you're a Republican. You're not going to find it in the District of Columbia. So I think he's in great legal jeopardy in the District of Columbia. The final case, the Fannie Williams case in Georgia, which you're seeing all this, there's a lot of it's the end of the world for Donald Trump.
We have 4 people that are flipping.
The 4 people are flipping, but again, it is a RICO case, right? It's a really complex set of facts that you have to prove. There's a current case that Fannie Williams is trying in Atlanta against a rapper named Young Thug, right?
You can't make this up.
You can't make this up, I swear. And that jury, so it's a similar kind of case, right, against one person, not 18. There are 18 people in the current case. But in that case, she's now going on month 7 months, and she still can't get a jury. They can't seat a jury for that one case. So if you think that case, that Atlanta case is going to be tried anytime soon, you're kidding yourself. It's not going to be, it may get tried in 2025 at some point in time, but it's not going to get tried anytime soon. It's not going to be dispositive. It's not going to have any impact. The only case may have an impact is the Jack Smith case in the District of Columbia, and we'll see if it gets delayed or they get to move venue. But that could have an impact. An impact in that the president will be convicted, and does that have an impact on the voters? I submit that people who don't care that he's got 91 counts against him, they're not going to care that he got convicted by a jury poll that, at a District of Columbia where 18,000 people voted for him. I think it kind of feeds into the narrative that kind of it's rigged again. And so I think he's on the path to being the nominee, and we'll see who's going to be the vice presidential nominee. I mean, kind of shrug your shoulders and we'll all wonder together. The bigger race coming up is, going to be in the fall. We'll see.
So I want to talk about 2024. We'll get to your questions, so please fill out the cards. Real quick question about 2016, because as Pennsylvania goes, so goes the country. At what point in the fall of 2016, you ran the campaign here, you were in Erie, when did you say Donald Trump is going to win? At what point?
At like 11:49 on election night.
So seriously, you didn't have an inkling before?
Listen, so it's funny. I met Trump a couple times before all this, right? I helped Rick Santorum in 2012 on Rick Santorum's presidential campaign. Some people scrapbook. I do like presidential politics as my hobby, right? So I was like flying around with Rick, and we were doing things, and we had a great race. And for those of you who are kind of presidential politic geeks, we came very close to beating Mitt Romney with like no money, right? And Rick really had that same message, that blue collar conservative message, right? That really appeals to people in Western Pennsylvania, in Erie. It's the Reagan Democrat, right? Kind of self-reliant, populism. And so I was helping Rick in 2016, and Rick kind of falls out, and I said to Rick in Iowa, he was in Iowa, and I said, well, who are you going to back? He said, I think I'm going to back Rubio. And I said, well, why? And he explained to me why. And I said, well, who do you think is going to win Iowa? Who do you think is the most popular in Iowa? And he said, I think Trump's going to win Iowa. And I said, well, why aren't you going to go with Trump? I like Trump too. I think he's going to win. And Rick said, oh, he's not going to win. He's not going to win. And so early on, so that was in, caucuses are in January, obviously. So kind of in March, all these names, you'll know all these names now. They're much bigger and more important names and much more notorious names now. But so I was friends with Roger Stone. Now you may or may not know Roger Stone, but Roger Stone is this master of the dark arts. And
do you know, I get to tell a quick story. So I was doing a live interview with Roger Stone. Swear to God, he's got a tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back. He took his shirt off and showed it to a national audience. Yeah. True story.
He's got a life-size tattoo of Richard Nixon's head in between his shoulder blades. That is on it. He was an unindicted co-conspirator in Watergate at like 22. And he and Lee Atwater and lots of other folks were kind of like the master of the political dark arts. So Roger was working for Trump, and I called Roger and I said, hey, listen, I want to help out Trump. I think he's going to win. And Stone at that point in time, he either got quit or he was fired by Trump. And it was like the day that they were comparing timestamps, whether I quit or was fired. And so Stone said, listen, we don't have anybody on the campaign. We need some help. And he said, Paul Manafort will call you tomorrow. I said, okay. These names meant nothing to me back then. And so the next morning I got a call not from Paul Manafort, but another guy named Rick Gates, who ended up going to jail as well. Rick Gates was a deputy campaign manager, and I met Rick Gates at the Capitol Grill in D.C., and I kind of had my political resume ready to kind of pitch him that I should help out on the Trump campaign, and I really want to be a player. And I sat down, and Rick Gates said to me, like, oh, you're on the team. We've got like 4 people. You're like the 5th guy on the team, so we need you. And as I started traveling around the state of Pennsylvania and other places, I went to Indiana. I helped win Pennsylvania primary, then went to Indiana to Indiana primary. I was driving around lots of places. I'd go back to D.C., and I'd sit down and kind of these salon dinners with like Margaret Carlson and kind of the gray hair people in Washington, D.C. who are so smart. And I remember at a dinner at Margaret Carlson's house with like Jack Quinn, Margaret Carlson, a bunch of, kind of
very Georgetown-y.
Very Georgetown. Jack Quinn was a White House counsel for Clinton. Margaret Carlson was at Time magazine, I think, at the time. These are all kind of, hoi polloi, inside the Beltway people. And I said, and everyone's like, who do you think is going to win? I said, Donald Trump. And they kind of laughed at me. They said, oh, you're a rube. And I said, no, I think he's going to win. And I explained to them why. And so as we kind of went on in the campaign, I went to Cleveland. I helped run the convention in Cleveland. And the first time I really spent any significant time with Trump was the first time I can remember actually really spending time with him, meeting him, kind of a one-on-one situation. It was at Lackawanna College over in the Scranton Wilkes-Barre area, and he's now the nominee, and so you get a lot of Secret Service, and there's sirens and police cars. Everybody pulls up, and he comes out of the car, and I introduce myself to him, and we get in the little locker room, which is the green room he's holding, and he said, "Do you think we're going to win?" And I said, "Yeah." Well, I said, "We're going to win Pennsylvania," and he said, "How do you know? How can you be so sure?" I said, "Mr. Trump, I got a guy elected in this state twice. People like way less than you," meaning my former boss, Arlen Specter. And so Trump kind of laughed, and we started the narrative. But I would drive around. I spent a great deal of time. When I was Specter's chief of staff, we'd go to every county, right? We'd drive around in the car and 67 counties every year, right? Started by late John Hines, and so I'd go into Sheetz, or I'd go into a Wawa, I'd go into a gas station, and I'd get in gas, or I'd stand next to somebody at the pump, and I'd say, "What do you think of this race?" And they'd just tell me, right? They'd tell you what they thought of it, right? And so I had these my polling was person here, person there, person here. My own firsthand experience driving around the Commonwealth, right? Going to, when I took Donald Trump to the Johnstown War Memorial, right? There hadn't been a presidential candidate in Johnstown since JFK, right? I mean, it is not rocket science that if you go to people and you ask for their votes, personally, they're probably likely to give it to you, right? When you pay attention to people, when you show up in Blair County, when you come to Erie and say, "I hear you. What do you guys want to?" I know what's aching you, what the problems are here. People are going to give you their vote. You got to ask for it. You got to show up. And so to think that you could win a presidential primary by just playing a lot of ads on Erie TV or Pittsburgh TV, or doing an event in Pittsburgh and it's good enough for Erie, it's not true. You got to show up in these counties. You got to be if you want to win Pennsylvania, you got to spend time in Pennsylvania. You got to come to Johnstown. You got to come to Erie. You got to spend time, connect with the people, let them know you care.
So let's talk about the president from Pennsylvania, Scranton, Joe Biden. Unemployment at a record low level. Pretty successful first 2 years. Infrastructure bill was significant. Interest rates are going up. Gas prices are high. Grocery prices are high. Turmoil in the Middle East. The war in Ukraine. Like it or don't like it, he gets the blame. The misery index, if you compare it with Reagan, is about 8-9%. That is inflation and the unemployment rate. But it's also the perception of where the country is going, and it's the president's age. So size up the challenges he's facing. Is that a pretty fair scenario of where we're at?
Absolutely. Steve, look, you all have eyes, right? You see this. You feel it in your pocketbook, right? You pay your bills. You see where you look at your 401k. You don't want to see brackets around your 401k, right? Right? You want to see, you get your monthly statement. I was even amazed in the Trump administration. I was like, wow, I made a lot of money this month, right?
Right.
Those are good things, right? That's what people
don't
want.
look this month.
Yeah, no, it's bad, right? And so, Biden, interestingly, I've known Joe Biden. So when I went to the Senate in 1997 as Arlen Specter's chief of staff, I spent a great deal of time with Joe Biden because I'd ride the train with Arlen Specter and Joe Biden from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia, and Biden would be on the car, we'd talk and spend time. And Joe Biden is a senator, and Joe Biden is the vice president. We're different than Joe Biden, the president. Completely different.
Because we hear that all the time. How so?
Well, how so is that, when he ran, Joe Biden said to everybody, look, Trump is a divisive character. I'm going to bring the country together. I'm a moderate Republican. I'm not going to govern like a crazy person. I'm going to be in the middle here. I'm going to bring our country together. And then when he got elected, I think he may have forgotten that. I think there's more cards there for you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks.
I think he forgot that, right? I think he forgot that he's from Scranton. I think he thinks he's from San Francisco, right? I mean, he governs like, Bernie Sanders is more conservative than Joe Biden governing, right? I mean, and people in America didn't elect Bernie Sanders. They elected Joe Biden. People thought they were electing Ed Rendell, right, as governor, kind of a middle-of-the-road Democrat. And they got someone who's not a middle-of-the-road Democrat. They got someone who is really very, very progressive, who is telling kids they don't have to pay back. Don't worry about paying back your school loans. Don't worry about it. Free education. Just take it. Go with it, right? I think people didn't elect that guy. And now people are having a little buyer's remorse. They saw what happened in Afghanistan, right? It was a disgrace for our country. It was a disgrace for the soldiers. It was a disgrace for the people in Afghanistan who supported us. The military advisors, General Mark Milley, who was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs Staff, General McKenzie, who was the commander of the troops in Afghanistan, all advised the president not to do it like he did it, not to withdraw so precipitously as he did it. It cost 13 Americans their lives in Afghanistan and withdrew. And it created a great deal of angst amongst the hundreds of thousands of men and women who served in Afghanistan honorably, trying to do what they think is best. So people, observe all these things, and they observe the president's age. He just doesn't seem to be mentally as sharp as, you'd hope one would be, right? I mean, he looks like he's being guided around. He kind of makes mistake after mistake. He reads his notes as he reads pause, dramatic pause. He reads the stuff that's in the script. I mean, he's making a lot of errors, and you don't want that in the leader of the free world, right?
And it's the one thing they cannot control. You can control politics. You can't control age.
My mom is 83. I love my mom. I just spent the weekend with my mom. She's a phenomenal woman. I wouldn't want her running the country, okay? Just fact of the matter, right? Like, she doesn't drive anymore for a reason, right? I mean, she's great. My mom's sharp. She's a great woman. She's with it, but you just get. I mean, I'm 60 now, right? There's things I can't do that I did when I was, I was in the gym yesterday with my nephew lifting weights. He's a lot stronger. Right? I was thinking I'm strong, but you get in there with a kid who's 20 and you realize you're not so strong. So things just, it's natural. It's a natural progression. And Joe Biden has become much more progressive than the Joe Biden that he sold to people, right? And he's surrounded by people who push a very aggressive agenda, very progressive agenda that I don't think people really want to accept. I mean, look at the Democratic Party is having a kind of war within itself as well. Like the Republican Party we talk about with the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the kind of our new speaker, right, Mike Johnson. You got some people who are more conservative. The Democratic Party has a war within itself on the whole anti-BDS kind of progressive movement, right? Summer Lee, the congresswoman from the city of Pittsburgh, was one of 12 members who voted against a bipartisan condemnation of Hamas, right? If you can't condemn terrorist organization who brutally murdered people, right, in a city that just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Tree of Life massacre, and you're that congresswoman, you're out of touch. If people aren't going to reelect you, that's not what people signed up for, right? And I think they see Biden as a part of that.
A lot of questions, quick answers. First of all, third-party campaign in 2024. How significant is that in this election? Third parties.
Oh,
no labels or RFK Jr. or
so really, right? Like, so RFK Jr. Is a really impressive candidate, right? I think he's done an incredible job for what he's done. I don't think it's going to matter one bit, right? Because he's not going to get on any ballots, right? The key here is the parties kind of have it rigged, right? The fix is in by the Democratic and Republican parties, right? Fix is in. You got to get on ballots, and it's super hard to get on ballots. And so if RFK were to get on ballots, I think he'd be very troubling to the Trump. Like, so interestingly, RFK polls higher. He polls very high with Democrats because he's got a Democratic name. He was a Democrat, but I think he'd end up getting more votes from Republicans because of the anti-vax kind of position. But I think he's not going to have any impact at all because he's not going to be on any ballots. The people I was saying for the longest time, I thought Cornel West was a African-American professor at Princeton, very smart guy, very charismatic, incredibly progressive, very talented politically. He was going to run on the Green ticket, the Green Party ticket, which is a ballot access in most states. Jill Stein ran, as you remember, in 2020. She got 3% of the vote. If I thought if he was going to run, he'd get much more than 3%, would be a spoiler. Now we still have the no labels folks, I think, who are getting on. I think they're on 11 ballots, or they're
13 ballots. They've raised $70 million.
Yeah. So if they get ballot access, that's the key, right? If they get on ballots, they get on states that matter, right? If they get on states that matter, if you get on states that don't matter, it's really irrelevant. But if you get on states like Pennsylvania and Ohio and North Carolina, if you get on some of these key states, and you get somebody, I've heard their dream ticket is like a mansion huntsman or a huntsman mansion, right? Two kind of moderate, middle of the road folks. I think that might make a difference. You'd end up being a spoiler more so than
that hurts Biden.
I think it hurt Biden. I think it would hurt Joe Biden more than Trump. Long answer, sorry.
Question about polling. Who is being polled? They say they would vote for him again. Could the polls be wrong?
Yeah.
I assume they're referring to Trump.
Yeah, listen, I think polling is very suspect, right? I never look at any one poll because you always wonder who polled. They're snapshot in time. It's that day, that week, that news cycle. I kind of look at trends, right? I look at the thing that I think is most valuable, right? If you go to like 528, the New York Times, 528 is pretty good. It's a kind of an amalgamation of a conglomeration of polling and pollsters. Also, like Real Clear Politics they have a kind of a dashboard of all the polls. If you look at trends, right, I think trends kind of are more predictive than any one poll. That being said, in 2016, the polls were wildly off, as you all know, right? I mean, during the Trump campaign, Trump was never close. I mean, we were down by 8 points the whole time. I don't think in Pennsylvania we ever got closer than 8 points. I think things have changed. I think back then people were ashamed to admit they were going to vote for Trump, and they would never tell a pollster that. I think things have changed now a little bit. Now, where you live and what club you belong to, what church you belong to, you still may be ashamed to say it, right? But I think the polls are a little more accurate now. And again, I just look at trends, and if you're ahead by 20, 30 points, I don't think that's wrong.
Question about Vladimir Putin. Can you explain Donald Trump's fascination with Putin, a man who is engaged in genocide inside Ukraine?
Yeah. I can't, right? I think Trump admires the strongman leader, whether they're bad or good. I think he thinks that he admires Nancy Pelosi. Trump has said many times he admires Nancy Pelosi because she governs with an iron fist and keeps her people in line. I think that he looks at Putin and thinks that he's managed to survive so long, being so hated, that he is, I don't know if it's enamored. I don't know. I don't understand the fascination with Putin, who is a brutal dictator, for lack of a better word, lack of a better characterization. So I can't answer. Don't have an answer for you.
Mike Johnson. Has the Republican Party now hit rock bottom since they have selected an election denier as the Speaker of the House?
Well, I'm not sure anyone knew they elected an election denier. I think they found that out afterwards. You guys.
He's a warm body after 3 weeks. Somebody is Speaker.
So he was the least hated person amongst the group of people, right?
What an incredible bar that is.
It is like, it is. It's from what I can gather, right, from what I see so far, I don't necessarily agree with his politics writ large. Again, you've heard I said I think the election, Republicans lost the election, and we shouldn't be ashamed. We lost it. We can do better. Mike Johnson has pledged to not let his personal views kind of govern the body writ large. And he said, these are the things I believe, but I have to convince the whole. Remember, there are 435 members of that Congress, and he has, he's got 220 of them basically, right? He has to corral and cajole and caress to get to go in his direction. So he's not going to be able to govern like a right-wing zealot, because the Mike Fitzpatricks of the world, the moderate Republicans, will not go along with him, right? He's going to need every Republican, and this is the part that people, Republicans control one leg of a three-leg stool, right? And they barely control it. So the Republicans in the House say, now, we're going to demand this, we're going to demand that. Well, you can hold your breath, and you're going to turn blue pretty quickly, because the president has a say, Chuck Schumer has a say, and they have two legs of the stool. So it's, you're going to have to be, just like they fired Kevin McCarthy because Kevin McCarthy cut a deal. Mike Johnson may be out of a job here on November 18th, which is the next deadline for cutting a deal and keeping the government open. He may cut a deal, and because
dear God, please no.
But you remember, they did not change the House Republicans did not change the motion to vacate the chair, which is the rule that says one person can wipe the slate clean. One person can go to the floor and say, I don't like Mike Johnson, I just want to put a motion to vacate the chair, and we all start again. Now, he's going to have to cut the exact same deal Kevin McCarthy cut, right, to get moving forward. The thing that Republicans need to understand, and Democrats as well, when you go to Washington, when you're a member of Congress, your job is not to be dogmatic. Your job is to be a legislator. Your job is to negotiate and come up with a solution that's best for the American people. It may not be a full loaf of bread. You may only get half what you're asking for, but you have to negotiate. You have to legislate. And I don't think there's many people in Washington that go there now to legislate. They go to see how many clicks they can get. They have a safe district. They don't really care. They're not going to win. They're not going to lose in a general election. They're going to lose in a primary. So they go there to grandstand. Matt Gaetz, right, the person who brought this all upon the Republican Party, Matt Gaetz could care less. He doesn't care if he legislates or creates any legislation. He cares that he's now on Fox News 48 hours a day, right? That's what drives him. He wants to be governor of Florida, I think. And so if you actually want to legislate and accomplish things, you're going to have to do deals that aren't great. You can't let, very good perfect be the enemy of very good. You get a lot of very good things done in America if people were willing to come to the middle. Tough.
Next question. This refers to Nikki Haley, who gave a pretty sharp speech yesterday in Las Vegas. The question is, what would it take to put another Republican candidate ahead of Trump, and what are the chances of Nikki Haley?
Look, Nikki Haley's incredibly impressive. She's a very gifted political athlete. She's really good at what she does. She's honest in her convictions. Incredibly impressive woman. Again, I think it's something catastrophic, right? Or something that comes out that we don't know about Trump, that Mark Meadows says, Trump was a spy for the Russians, something like really over the top crazy, that would have to come out. That would be, never say never, right? I mean, we never thought things would happen the way they're happening now, but it would have to be something like that cataclysmic, that a black swan event that we can't predict, right? That would make people say, wow, we can't have Trump. Who's next best? I don't think it's DeSantis. I think Ron DeSantis, he's trying hard. I think it's a little too late, too little. But
he's not very likable.
Yeah, Ron DeSantis is not a guy you want to have a beer with, I'll just tell you
No.
that. Yeah. Nikki Haley is a very charming.
He's from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, so this is inside baseball. Here's a good story. Aliquippa story for you there, Monsignor. So I'm greeting Donald. So, when, I live in Fort Myers, Florida, and the president's coming to Fort Myers. And so the campaign has people greet the president, right? And so when you go on the tarmac to greet the president of the United States, it's usually somebody who's, of some stature politically or in the business community or whatever. It was me because I picked myself to meet the president.
Smart guy.
Yeah, little. Don't tell anybody that. But so my wife and I are going to greet the president in Fort Myers, and so we're in the green room with Ron DeSantis, which is it's not very big. It's about as big as this stage, maybe a little smaller. And he's the governor, and his state police guy's in there, and he's on his phone texting. Doesn't say boo to myself or my wife. We're in there for probably 15, 20 minutes. We walk out on the tarmac, kind of awkwardly, and I say to the governor, I said, hey, Governor, I just want to introduce myself, David Urban. I'm a constituent of yours, and I said, this is my wife, and I said, but my superpower is that I helped Donald Trump win Pennsylvania, and on and on and on. And he looks at me and he says, oh, my father's from Pennsylvania. I said, really, where? He goes, you never heard of it. It's a small place. I said, well, where? He said, my father's from Aliquippa. Can't make that up, Monsignor. And I said to the president, I said to DeSantis, I go, I'm from Aliquippa. And he looked at me and he just said, just kept walking. That's when I knew Ron DeSantis would never be president of the United States. You can't get a more softball.
Right.
Like Monsignor, he didn't say what parish did you go to, what high school did you graduate from.
I mean, can you imagine?
He just said, He didn't say Steelers lost, terrible
Right.
game. There was none of it.
But I mean, a George W. Bush, a Donald Trump, a Bill Clinton, they would be all over that for 20 minutes.
Listen, George W. Bush, funny, I'll tell you, George, you're bright. So, I went to West Point, played football at West Point. I was introducing my parents to George W. 43. And I said to the president, I said, you coming to the game? It was right before the Army-Navy game. And he said, no. And he goes, what school did you go to? And I said, I went to West Point. And he pulled me close. He said, you're going to get your asses kicked this weekend. Right? I mean, he was that kind of guy. He's a regular guy, right? A shot in a beer kind of guy, right? When I said, I'm from Aliquippa, and he said, and just kept walking.
Well, Bush was
I
here
couldn't
2
vote
years
for him.
ago.
I couldn't vote for him.
There you
I'm saying
go.
you're sorry.
Final question. Joe Biden is 80. He'll be 81 in a month. Donald Trump is only 3 years younger. Both men seem to have issues. Can't we do better?
Yeah, like I said, I think, look, we could put cards and you guys could pass up, we'd have a lot of great names, right, who could be running, right? Listen, Josh Shapiro is a good friend of mine. I think he's going to make a great candidate at some point. Wes Moore is a Democratic guy. These guys are Democrats. They're not even Republicans. They are really talented professionals, right? Really talented people who I think could be great, great governors, great leaders of our country at some point in time. I think everybody wants better for our country. Everybody does. But unfortunately, we get what we get, right? We get the same reason that, WWE Raw and like Roseanne were #1 shows in America. Right? For the same reasons. I look at the ratings. I'm like, who watches those shows? Like, who watches Real Housewives? Like, I don't know. Like,
So last question.
not to knock the Real Housewives people.
No, I know. By the way, we'll be talking politics in 2 weeks, and Lisa Adams will be joining us. Lisa, if you could stand up with Karen Tumulty and Laura Coates. So join us on the 12th of November. And then November 13th, we've got the person who I think should have been the vice president, Val Demings, coming to Erie. She's a very impressive.
So interestingly, right? So I talked to a lot of my Democratic colleagues, right, on CNN. And, one of the other reasons that Joe Biden stands a better than 50% chance of losing the presidency is because of the vice president. Because Kamala Harris is seen as so vacuous. And time after time again, Val Demings, who is an incredible congresswoman from Florida, was law enforcement, is just an incredibly impressive woman, would have been a great pick. Great pick.
Yeah, she's here
So
with Michael Steele.
You're in for a treat.
You are in for a treat.
Yeah, she's very smart.
We're going to sell out this event because she is so incredible, and Michael Steele is along for the ride. Real quick, Pennsylvania, Senate race, Dave McCormick,
Yep.
Bob Casey, next year.
So I'm a little biased here. Dave McCormick happens to be a personal friend of mine, went to West Point with me. I've known him for a long time.
How many went to West Point with you? My daughter went to Navy, so
listen,
go Navy, beat Army. I'm sorry. but go
Listen,
ahead.
I'm just saying, it must be something about that West Point. My class, right? Pretty successful. But Dave McCormick's an incredibly impressive guy. Bob Casey's been a friend of mine before when he taught at the Jesu School in Philadelphia. I've been friends with Bob for a long time. I knew his father. He's a very nice man. I think people in Pennsylvania it's gonna be a tough race, right? McCormick's very talented, kind of charismatic, hard charger. He grew up at a Christmas tree farm. He's got a great personal narrative. His grandfather had a drugstore like in Punxsutawney, he's got a great story. Bob has been here for a long time, and I think people are going to ask the question, like, what have you done, right? Bob Casey is not Bob Casey Sr. Bob Casey's father, Bob Casey Sr., as you may know in this room, was, a very pro-life governor, so much so that the Democratic Party wouldn't let him speak at the convention. He was the, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which is a seminal case in kind of pro-life, pro-choice world, was Bob Casey Sr. And Bob Casey Jr. is not that person. He's much more progressive. And we'll see. We'll see if that, if it's a name ID thing or if it's an idea kind of competition. It's going to be close. It'll be a close race.
We will conclude where we began. You talked about coming to Erie. Wacky Shack, Pirates Cove, or the Comet. Which was your favorite? At Waldemere.
Listen, I love Waldemere, and I'm not going to pick because I don't want to alienate
come
anybody.
on.
I don't want to alienate anybody in the room, okay? I'm not going to alienate anybody in the room, but it's great. I will say this. I'm a huge fan. I love going again. So I'm in my hotel taking pictures of the Brig Niagara out my window because I love it so much. And I think it's a treasure, a national treasure you guys have here. And it's, Erie's a great city. Be proud of it. Be proud of getting a chance to live here. And thanks for having me.
David Urban, thank you very, very much. We appreciate it.